On the morning of June 22, 1941, the Germans were on a long front of more than 2,000 kilometers. Divided into three army groups, the Soviet Union launched a surprise attack. So this is the famous Project Barbarossa. The fires of World War II finally burned to Soviet territory. The war has just begun. Almost all airports in the Western Soviet Union, it was devastated. More than 200 of various aircraft were lost in one day. 800 planes were destroyed before they could take off. Various military bases along the border. Communication facilities are severely damaged. The command structure of the military region is basically paralyzed. The Germans, on the first day of the war, it has penetrated more than 50 kilometers into the territory of the Soviet Union. In the early days of the Soviet-German War, the Soviet Union was devastated as never before. These heavy losses make many people strongly criticize the Soviet Union's war preparations. Think the Soviet Union was paralyzed, inadequate preparation. Some people even think that the Soviet Union slept under Soviet-German non-aggression, peace through treaties. In a dream, didn't even realize that war was going to break out between the two countries. So what is the reality? Was the Soviet Union passively prepared for war, even sleeping in the illusion of peace? In this video, we will talk about this topic. Mention Soviet-German relations in the early days of World War II. A lot of people. The first thing that comes to mind is the Soviet-German Household Violation Treaty. It is believed that the Soviet Union and Germany have long been airborne, preparing to carve up Europe. But in the end, because of the disagreement of interests, just fought. And in fact, such short honeymoon period, it's just a tacit spitting tactic on both sides. Whether it is the relationship between the Soviet Union and Germany, or the relationship between communism and Nazism, from the very beginning, fire and water were incompatible. The rise of the Nazis in Germany, by stepping on the corpses of communists, concocted the Congressional Arson. Before Germany, Italy and Japan formed the Axis powers. The Anti-Comintern Pact was signed first. In the Spanish Civil War, Germany and the Soviet Union support opposing sides. The forces supported by both sides are: Spain has been beaten with blood and flesh. The Germans are conducting a German-Austrian merger. When annexing the Sudetenland and other expansionist actions, the Soviet Union also launched corresponding protests and boycotts. Hitler has long clamored to destroy the socialist Soviet Union. In Hitler's plan to dominate Europe, oil from the Soviet Union, mineral food and other resources will be used to support the German army to counter the future entry of the United States into the war. Therefore, the relationship between the Soviet Union and Germany, from the very beginning, it was incompatible. With you, without me. Hitler and Stalin also realized this. Then why sign a non-aggression pact? To form a short-term alliance? This has to... Mentioning their shared time needs. Stalin had already met the Nazis. The potential threat of socialism. In the English and French draft with the policy, the Soviets are already calling. European nations come together to resist possible German aggression. Because Britain and France fear the outbreak of a new world war. Therefore, it is necessary to avoid conflict with Germany as much as possible. No will? To resist German expansion with the Soviet Union, even trying to divert the disaster. Let the Soviet Union and Germany lose each other. I am sitting on the power of the fisherman. So in the face of the olive branch extended by the Soviet Union, Anglo-French responses are always cold and delayed. For example, from April to August 1939, the Soviet-led three-nation talks are underway in Moscow. This protracted negotiation, and to no avail. Britain and France acquiesced to Germany's recklessness, rejected the Soviet Union's cooperation offer. Finally, the patience of the Soviet Union was exhausted. The Soviets also saw the face of Sweden in Britain and France clearly, recognizing the continued call for a boycott of Germany can only be a futile. Since war is inevitable, Britain and France are unreliable, so you're on your own. But to be fully prepared for war, the Soviets still need a long time. At this time, the German side, the plan to attack Poland is imminent. But Hitler was worried. Attacking Poland would attract Britain, French counterattack. If the Soviet Union joined the war again, then Germany will be under attack from both sides, overwhelmed. So when the news came that the negotiations between the Soviet Union and Britain and France had broken down, Hitler immediately realized this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. To avoid the situation of multi-front combat, the best way for the Germans is to stabilize the Soviet Union first, then gradually conquer the whole of Europe. So what the Germans need is time. It is based on a shared need for time. August 23, 1939. The Soviet Union and Germany are in Moscow, signed the Soviet-German Household Aggression Treaty. This treaty not only promises non-aggression between the two countries, it also divides the spheres of influence of the two sides. Germany will occupy western and central Poland. The Soviet Union will occupy San Francisco, Polish territory east of the Bug River. This is Soviet territory lost in the Soviet-Polish War. The Soviets considered this to be restitution. After the treaty is signed, although the two countries ostensibly maintain friendly and cooperative relationship, but in fact neither side expected the treaty to last long. It's tacit. Maintaining the peace we have created together. Fake projects are secretly stepping up preparations. Both Stalin and Hitler understood. The Soviet-German war was only a matter of time. But when will the war begin? These two people have different ideas and arrangements. Before the outbreak of the Soviet-German War, the red giant of the Soviet Union, not sleeping in the illusion of peace. They prepare for war under the guise of sleep. The Soviet Union responded to the German invasion, made 4 preparations. First, advance war, mobilization, and troop expansion. In response to the German invasion, the Soviet Union had already mobilized for war. This is also after the outbreak of the Soviet-German War. One of the reasons why the Soviet Army had a large number of biological armies. As early as 1937, the Soviet Union responded to the impending invasion. Start expanding the military and carry out military service reform. The militia were reincarnated as the regular army. By the beginning of 1939, the Soviets already had 1.50 million regular army. After the partition of Germany and the Soviet Union, border territory, facing the potential threat from Germany, the Soviet Union further expanded its army. In less than 2 years, a dramatic expansion of the force to 5 million. In the Air Force. In late 1940, the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union approved the reorganization, the decision of the Red Army Air Force. The document calls for an increase in the number of Air Force personnel, replace old models with new models and equipment, and to expand the size of the Air Force Academy, cultivate a large number of talents for the Air Force. In addition, in response to the Soviet-Finnish War, the lack of good commanders exposed. Many were stopped and arrested in the Great Purge. Arrested officers have also been able to return to command positions. In addition to the content mentioned above, there are still many measures to expand and rebuild the Soviet Army, almost every branch of the military. It is these measures, accumulated for the future Soviet response to the war. A large number of soldiers and military personnel. Second, accelerate the development and production of weapons and equipment. In order to meet the needs of future mechanized warfare, the Soviet Union began in 1940. Intensify the formation of mechanized troops. In the military establishment, the plan is to establish 29 mechanized armies. Each army should have 36,000 men, equipped with more than 1,000 tanks and other auxiliary equipment. In addition, the fighter jets of the Air Force, bombers and rifles for infantry, submachine gun, ammunition, and all other weapons and equipment are expanding production. New equipment that has never been seen on the battlefield, such as the T-34 tank and the Katyusha rocket launcher. They are all for the coming war. New weapons developed. It is precisely because of scientific research and development and vigorous production in military industry. Soviet military industry. Quantity can be used in future wars, meeting the equipment requirements of millions of troops. And on this basis, you can also invest in a series of advanced weapons and equipment to promote the development of the war situation. This is inseparable from the active preparation before the war. The third is to establish a lie zone. Soviet Union, except for the partition of Poland with Germany in 1939, also through the tragic victory of the Soviet-Finnish War, acquired a part of Finland, and annexed the 3 Baltic countries in 1940. These acts of aggression that disregard the sovereignty of other countries, it was also a buffer that the Soviets were using to prepare for the war. The specific means of the district. It is because of this series of territorial annexations. The Soviet Union expanded its strategic engagement, able to survive the German Blitz, swap space for time, fight for respite. Fourth, actively develop intelligence stations. Since the Soviet Union realized that there must be a war between the Soviet Union and Germany, so while preparing for war, it also stepped up the collection of intelligence on Germany. Internal People's Committee, General Intelligence Directorate of the Soviet General Staff. And each military region has its own intelligence channel. And before the war, there is a lot of intelligence that Germany is about to invade. Soviet Union, the most famous of these was the Soviet spy Sorja, revealed German invasion plans. In addition to its own intelligence agencies, Britain, the United States, and other countries will also inform the Soviet Union of relevant information. So the Soviet invasion of Germany, not ignorant, he had a lot of information. There were no fewer than 90 warnings. Indicates that a German invasion is imminent. Preparations for the above 4 aspects. All explained. The Soviet Union was not inactive before the war broke out. Then why in this situation? The Soviet army is still on the verge of collapse. So let me give you an answer. This question. Why did the overseer fail miserably in the early days of the Soviet-German War? There are also 4 reasons. The first, preparation time is insufficient, resulting in dry external walls. Although the Soviet Union has made a series of war preparations. But the overall preparation time is still far from sufficient. According to the Soviet plan, the expansion of the army was expected to be completed by the end of 1942. It wasn't until 1943 that we were fully prepared for war. So when the Barbarossa plan was executed, the Soviet Union's war preparations were also, it's going to take at least another year and a half. Before the war, although the Soviet Army's strength has been rapidly expanded, a total of 27 army groups, 303 divisions, a total of 5 million troops, plus 20,000 or so tanks and more than 19,000 airplanes are seen in numbers. The Soviet army was a behemoth, especially when it comes to the number of tanks and aircraft. It surpassed Germany. But it turns out, the Soviet Union's armaments are only external strength. Due to the rapid expansion of the army, the troops are generally undertrained, and there is a shortage of experienced commanders at all levels. Soviet infantry division personnel, weapons and equipment, transport. Almost everything is missing in terms of apartments and communication facilities. The combat effectiveness of an infantry division. It is only about 1/3 the size of Germany. The newly formed mechanized army, its training level and combat experience are seriously insufficient. And the goal of installing new tanks is far from being achieved. Even waiting for a new tank, those outdated BT and T-26 tanks, neither is it properly maintained. Before the war broke out, 29% of older tanks require major repairs. 44% require routine repairs. Air Force. The originally planned formation of 106 aviation regiments, only 19 were formed. 13 of them are defenseless. Long-range combat capability. Bombing group. Hundreds of airports are being built and renovated. The plane can't do it. Do camouflage and evacuation. All packed and parked in unfinished airports, or on a temporary runway. And at this time, the main force of the Soviet Air Force, Lem-116 fighter jets and DB-3 bombers, are outdated. Performance is inferior to German aircraft. New aircraft produced after 1939, for example Jacques Larget 3, MiG-3, Il-2, and other advanced fighter jets. It hasn't been delivered on a large scale yet. 80% of the Air Force's aircraft are outdated models. And even more deadly. Soviet Air Force, for fear of taking responsibility for the crash. Pilots generally lack flight training, especially the training of new aircraft. The time is only about 4 hours. Airborne troops due to lack of training and equipment. It can only be used as infantry. The defense line on the new border is only 20% complete at most. Can't resist the German attack at all. And the Soviet army, ignoring the necessity of defensive warfare. The establishment of missing rear traffic lines and command systems. For example, 11 new railways in the western military regions, limit completed 8%, including phone calls. Telegraph. Communication networks, including radios, are inefficient. Commands and reports are difficult to convey quickly. These all led to war attendance. The chaos within the Soviet army. Second, the border is too weak to avoid conflict. In order to delay the outbreak of war as much as possible, prevent Germany from, the Soviet Union launched a war in the name of first provocation. Soviet troops deployed on the border were ordered, at any cost, tolerate German provocations. The Soviets even allowed German reconnaissance planes deep into the Soviet Union for reconnaissance, airports that are currently under construction, location of warehouses and defense lines, and the deployment of troops. This is how the Germans found out. The war begins. The German Air Force immediately responded. They are accurate. Destroy. So the Soviets went to war. There are not many defensive offensives to rely on. And here's what's even more important. Soviet frontline troops under the thinking of Station B, they were not prepared for the battle they were supposed to be. According to pre-war planning, the Red Army's defense should be in a kick-and-stab configuration. It's a very clever arrangement. Once the first echelon is attacked, the second echelon of strategy will launch a counteroffensive. The invading Germans are likely to be cut and surrounded. Unfortunately, when the war broke out, armies did not follow the mobilization and deployment plan, complete deployment. This led to the outbreak of war. It's hard to organize a counterattack quickly. The influence of the Third Higher will. The Soviet leadership led by Stalin, in response to the German offensive. My heart is full of contradictions. On one hand, everyone knows that war could break out at any moment. On the other hand, I deceived myself. The Germans will do as we envision. Give us enough time to prepare. The reasons for this ambivalence. Mainly, Germany was still at war with Britain. Stalin did not believe that Germany would defeat Britain before attack on the Soviet Union, because that would make the German fathers an enemy. Even leaders are inevitably like ordinary people. Only believe what you want to believe. Thinking about how long it takes to get ready for war, Stalin believed that Germany will not be until 1942 at the earliest, or war in 43 years. And at that time, the Soviet Union also conducted a large amount of trade with Germany, back and forth. Even Germany attacked many of France and England. Military materiel, all provided by the Soviet Union. So Stalin could never have imagined Germany was going to attack in 1941. Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was a highly centralized state. The will of the leader can govern everything. So the Soviet Union went from top to bottom. Both chose to cater to Stalin's ideas. It is necessary to render a peaceful and pleasant atmosphere, those officers with meaning, for fear that opposition leaders will be killed. Disaster, so I dare not speak to the public. The front lines are preparing for a defensive offensive. But ordinary soldiers also think of war. Won't explode right away. They let down their guard. Now, the Red Giant's fake sister even deceived herself. It is under the influence of this contradictory thinking. On the one hand, the Soviet army is actively preparing for war. On the other hand, it is necessary for many attacks. Turn a blind eye. That led to the great defeat at the beginning of the war. Fourth, intelligence confusion and communication difficulties. The Soviet intelligence network was fully developed. However, due to the diverse sources of intelligence, plus disinformation spread by Germany, leading to the Soviet high level, received a lot of conflicting information. Even those who meet in Germany will. Intelligence on the Soviet war. The dates provided by each are also different. The date of the German invasion. There are at least a dozen different versions. In addition, because Dalian knows, the British wanted the Soviet Union to start a war as soon as possible. To relieve its own pressure, it does not rule out the possibility that the British are fanning the flames. So any intelligence channel related to the UK, they're not trusted. Another reason is that Germany itself has not been finalized. The start date of Operation Barbarossa. Until June 10th, the date was fixed in writing as 22nd. This results in Soviet Union. The exact date of the German attack has never been known. June 22, 1941, a few hours before the Germans launched their attack. Under the auspicious persuasion of Zhukov and Timothy Shin, finally got Stalin's permission. Issued an order for the border military district to be armed. Enter full alert. But due to the long-term passive slack of frontline commanders, resulting in very slow command transmission, plus poor communication. Until the war, Pavlov's troops were the first to defeat the enemy. Were not ready for battle, causing the front to almost collapse. According to the factors we mentioned above, it can be seen that the Soviet Union's defeat at the outset of the war, it's not unprepared, but rather in a series of caused by the combined action of complex internal and external factors. Although the Soviet Union made many preparations for war, but due to time constraints, only appropriate and confusion in intelligence and communications. Cut into the Soviet resistance, plus the Soviet high-level attack on Germany, misjudgment of time. Finally, caused the Red Giant to fake in the early days of the war, sleep and defeat. However, the conclusion of the Soviet-German war was not influenced by the fiasco of the early Soviet Union was the final word. Facing the German onslaught and rapid advance, Soviet Union still have a huge strategy, deep and sufficient resource reserves. As time goes by, the Soviet Union gradually learned its lesson, adjusted the command system, reformed tactics, steadily improved combat capabilities, especially after the Battle of Stalingrad. The Red Army turned the tide of the war. The German offensive began to encounter more resistance, more and more powerless. In the next video, we will also explore how the Soviet Union survived against adversity, how to live in Moscow, in key battles such as Stalingrad step by step, restore the decline, and finally won the Great Patriotic War. Welcome to continue following